But what I am saying is that to blame the doctor solely and not blame some other likely outside factors adding on to it, whether it be time constraints, systemic pressures, whether it be communication styles. I think that's probably more important than anything else. I talk about this all the time when I talk about the doctor-patient relationship. The reason why that is so important is that when you are on the same plane as your doctor, you can tell your doctor things, your doctor can tell you things, you guys can listen, you guys can bounce each other off. If there's a misalignment going on, your doctor says one thing, you say one thing, you guys never meet in the middle, right? And that's how that doctor becomes that villain. All right, so we hear these stories. I read these stories, whether it's on Twitter or a blog post, or sometimes I see a video come across my timeline where it says, man, I ignored my doctor's advice. I trusted my gut and I was right. And it makes for a great plot twist, right? Because typically, right, you go to your doctor's supposed to tell you what to do, tell you the right thing to do, and then it turns out good, right? But sometimes that doesn't happen. The issue I tend to have, and that's what we're going to discuss today, is that a lot of times the doctor is made out to be the villain in that story, right? I want y'all to think about this. The amount of people who have some origin story wrapped around some evil healthcare provider or villainous, I won't call him evil, villainous healthcare provider that didn't follow directions, that didn't listen to a symptom, that didn't do something, but despite them not doing what they're supposed to do, I turned out okay, is a little bit too much for me. And you know me, right? I'm empowering for better health. Like, I got no problem on the side of the patient, right? But I want to give my doctor some reprieve because I know it's a hard job. And I know there are a lot of other factors that never gets told or never gets talked about in these stories until today, right? So we're going to talk about this aspect of the failure of a healthcare system and why it's always put on a doctor, but it's usually not the doctor's fault. All right, so there's this growing, it continues to be a growing narrative, especially in a time like this where being an expert is actually looked down upon. Right? Like, we're living, depending on when you're watching this or listening to this, we're living in a time where having a level of expertise is almost looked at as a negative for some people in some circles. Not all, but in some people in some circles, they will act like you going to college, going to medical school, going to residency isn't enough to be able to tell them about the level of expertise that they should have, even though all they may have done is read on a blog post or listen to, one of these random podcasts kind of talk about it. Not the Dr. Pierre, Lunch and Learn with Dr. Pierre podcast, but some random other podcaster who won't take any responsibility when it hits the fan, but they've got no problem going to them toe to toe, right? So the issue at hand is the gap continues to grow. We've talked about this before, of being the villain in the story, being the doctor, and being dismissive and out of touch, and how that's usually not the case. I talked about, I think about a month or so ago, a person who passed away, right? Like Nana Lewis passed away from breast cancer and did not take any medications, right? And what's not told in that story, which I noticed, what's not told in that story is that it wasn't as if there was some healthcare provider there who told, don't take those medications, don't take this, don't take that, right? Like, that was not a part of that story. It was always, I seen, the story was, she saw the reactions for family members growing up who were dealing with the same cancer, didn't want to have experienced that. And again, obviously didn't have, enough, wherewithal to figure out like, hey, maybe I should do something different, maybe did something different. But I can assure you, if there had been a healthcare provider there telling her, don't take this medication, don't take your chemo, don't do radiation, don't do this, don't do that, we would know who that healthcare provider's name, medical school, graduation, hospital, like we would know everything about the healthcare provider, right? But because there was no healthcare provider to make a villain, all of a sudden it just becomes a sad story of a young woman who passed away from a cancer that, again, not to say that she wouldn't have passed away eventually from the cancer, but she definitely passed away a lot sooner from said cancer, right? No villain attached, right? But I see these stories that when it's convenient to put a doctor as a villain, boy, they put a doctor as a villain, right? Like, oh my God, I didn't listen to that doctor. Thank God I did listen to that doctor. Now I'm on the way, right? And I think it's important to know, right? Because these stories are powerful. They're powerful stories. And again, and I'm not saying that the people who have these types of stories aren't telling the truth. I'm not saying that they did not run into a healthcare provider, right, especially a doctor, right, because it's usually a doctor, who didn't listen to them, who didn't trust them, who didn't listen to their symptoms. I'm not saying that's the case. Y'all already know me. Y'all already know that's not the case here. I already know we got some faults. But what I am saying is that to blame the doctor solely and not blame some other likely outside factors adding on to it, whether it be time constraints, systemic pressures, whether it be communication styles. I think that's probably more important than anything else. I talk about this all the time when I talk about the doctor-patient relationship. The reason why that is so important is that when you are on the same plane as your doctor, you can tell your doctor things, your doctor can tell you things, you guys can listen, you guys can bounce each other off. If there's a misalignment going on, your doctor says one thing, you say one thing, you guys never meet in the middle, right? And that's how that doctor becomes that villain. The amount of people who will have one doctor as the arch villain in their story, while another person will have that doctor as the hero in a story, like you would be shocked or surprised, but I'm not, right? Because again, that kind of goes back to the misalignment, right? So there's a lot of different factors associated when we think about, the origin stories of not listening to your doctor, not trusting your doctor. But we have to understand that there are so many different things at play that your doctor likely has nothing to do with, right? But just the system in tow that kind of affects it, right? So we're going to talk about it from just my perspective, right? Because I think it's important. All right. So when we think about like the perspective of the doctor, right? Who's typically the villain in these stories, right? You know of this doctor who typically has a lot of patients to see. Usually their appointments hopefully range about 15 to 20 minutes. Some are shorter. In that time, they have to diagnose, they have to document, they have to treat, right? They have to be able to analyze. They have to do all of these different things on top of education. They have to do all of these things within the 15 to 20 minute time frame. You'd be surprised how quickly 15 to 20 minutes kind of goes by. Again, not an excuse. That's a system issue that says, hey, because of the way the system works, I don't have the ability to spend 20, 30 minutes on every single person, or you guys would be in that room ready to cause a revolt because you can never get back here to see me, right? I just don't have the time, right? So that's a system issue that plays into a factor. But in the story of someone who may say, man, that doctor rushed me in and out the room, even though the rush may have been 15 minutes, but because it wasn't 25 minutes, they feel rushed. All of a sudden, the villain arc like comes to play, right? What are some other issues that are typically associated with kind of getting into the way of, doctor-patient relationship and adding to that villainous role, right? Clinical guidelines, data, insurance, right? All of these different things here, right? When you are dealing with, let's say you have a patient who has high blood pressure, right? And the EMR says, all right, this person has high blood pressure. You need to order this lab test. You need to talk about this diagnosis. Oh, they have diabetes. You need to talk about this and that. Oh, they have high cholesterol. You need to talk about this and that. And if there isn't like a marriage together of like, hey, this is how my office visit goes. This is what the insurance company, this is how they want me to go. All of a sudden, right, you have this pace that seems just not being able to keep up with the demand. So you have a problem where like all these requirements are put on the doctor, right, to do. And you as a patient, you don't know any better. You just know that, hey, I took a half day off from work, or maybe I'm on my lunch break. And thankfully, you're able to get me during my lunch break and don't make me wait 10, 15 minutes after, right? Like my scheduled time, right? Again, I trust me. I did outpatient medicine, so I know what it's like, and I'm a patient, right? So I know what it's like to be on the other side of having an appointment at 1:00, don't get seen till 1:15 because everything is backed up. You're not realizing the reason why it's backed up is because a person 4 hours later decided to run late, and all these things happen, right? Again, nothing to do with the doctor, everything to do with these outside external forces associated with the doctor. But guess who gets put on front page of the origin story when you say, you know what, I'm not going to the doctor no more. They didn't listen to me, right? They rushed me out. Like, I want nothing to do with it, right? So understand that when you have patients, right? And I've seen this before, right? Where, and typically their story is something happens to them and they didn't know it was going to happen. Something happens to them and it's a surprise to them, right? And that's a lot of times, and we talked about this when we talk about just, making sure that the stuff that your doctor isn't telling you, right? Like there's that window where hey, if you would have asked the right questions, your doctor would have told you that, but you didn't ask the right question. So your doctor didn't realize that they needed to answer that question, or knew that they couldn't answer that question because it would have extended the time frame, because it would have made this 15-minute appointment turn to an 18-minute appointment. And you may not think that's a lot, right? But if the first 10 people stretch an appointment by 3 minutes, guess what, right? That's 30-minute block. That's a 30-minute block that you are now behind because the first 10 people you gave an extra 3 minutes, right? So again, I'm not here to absolve the inefficiencies within the system. I'm here to just show you guys, hey, there's inefficiencies in the system. Please don't put us as the main character in your story. Because they're never saying, oh my God, the healthcare system ruined me. The healthcare system didn't listen to me. The healthcare system ignored my symptoms. It's always Dr. So-and-so didn't pay attention to me. Dr. So-and-so didn't listen to my problems. Dr. So-and-so didn't tell me what the adverse reactions are, right? And I just want to make sure that we zoom out just a little bit and say, hey, don't blame Dr. So-and-so, blame the system in and of itself, right? And sometimes you might have to blame yourself. We're going to go there. Yes, don't go away now. Yes, we are going to go there. A lot of times when I hear or I read or I see these origin stories, I always ask, all right, did the patient do a good enough job explaining what their issues were? Did the patient I'm asking these questions because no one seems to want to ask these questions. No one seems to want to point out that, hey, it may be the patient's fault that the doctor didn't listen to you because maybe you didn't do a good enough job explaining your symptoms. Maybe you told your doctor half of the symptoms, was embarrassed to tell him the other half, so your doctor really couldn't come into a great conclusion of what was going on. It's a possibility. Y'all. I'm just saying it's a possibility. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm not saying that you should challenge everyone who has an origin story that, hey, did you ask the right questions or did you make your doctor answer the questions appropriately, right? Was there a misalignment? I'm not saying that. I don't want you to go do that. I just want you to know that there are some factors at toe that may play a role, right? Those who know me, I am the co-founder of Autism in Black, right? And a part of my wife's origin story, right, is the healthcare system, they just did not listen to us, right? And they she told them, hey, I think my daughter's autistic. They said, nah, you should wait. It's early. And she had a frustration with the doctors, right? Because the doctors weren't giving her the answer she was looking for in the appropriate time, right? And of course, I'm a parent, I take my doctor hat off. I'm the parent, right? So as the parent, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of crazy. They're kind of delayed. But then when I put my physician hat on, I could see if a certain guideline says, hey, I have to wait for this and this to happen, and it didn't happen yet, I can't just really jump out there and give you a diagnosis. I can see it both ways. But I can tell you right now, if you listen to my wife's origin story, there's a few villains in that story, and a lot of them are the healthcare providers, right? I'm one of them. Right? Because when she told me, I was like, diagnose your patients, don't diagnose my daughter. Right? And that was me, not with the parent hat on, that was me with the doctor hat on, right? Because again, I read and I said, oh, it's kind of early, right? So maybe you should kind of wait to hold off on diagnosing her and focus on your people, right? Like that was my thought. Right? That was the doctor me, right? That again, I shouldn't be a villain, like a star in that story, but like I kind of am because again, at the time, she's not looking at the system says a doctor should operate this way. She's just looking at the doctor operating this way. And she didn't have the wherewithal to understand as a patient, hey, you know what? Yes, the doctors aren't, listening to me, but maybe they're constrained by certain forces that I'm not even thinking about. That wasn't even in her purview. Still not in her purview, right? But these are the kind of things that happen, right? When I say the doctor being that villain, a lot of times there are systems in place that afford you to be able to put that doctor in the villain role, but somehow absolve the system, right? They don't say the healthcare system, right, does Black women bad. They say doctors do Black women bad. They want to be able to put a finger on it and say that person didn't listen to me. That healthcare provider didn't listen to me. When it's a whole system that's likely playing a role to it, right? And again, sometimes it could be the patient's fault, right? Yeah, don't shoot the messenger. I am just making a statement, right? When we say, hey, the doctor is the blame, maybe it's not all the doctor. So I think when we are trying to, especially as a physician, trying to absolve ourselves from the role of villain, in our patient's story, right? Understand that, hey, not only does the patient need to be prepared, but you as the doc, you got to be prepared as well, right? And I've talked about this ad nauseam, right? Understanding that there are certain questions as a doctor you can ask, right? There are certain questions as a patient you can ask to make sure that everyone's on the right page, to make sure that that alignment is going where it needs to go. So there is no possible way that down the line, like you could be a part of a keynote and you have no clue you're a part of a keynote, right? No clue. Again, the amount of TED Talks I see, and it's like this random doctor from somewhere didn't listen to me and and I'm just like, I wonder if that random doctor even knows that they're a part of your story. Because it's not like the patients are running back to tell them. It's not like they're saying, hey, despite what you did or did not do, right? I was right, you were wrong. I'm going to do a whole thing about it, right? They're not doing that, right? So the amount of doctors who are likely a part of origin stories who have no clue they're part of these origin stories is a little comical to me. But again, it's important when we talk about this aspect of making sure the communication is there and where it needs to be. So make sure that, again, as a doctor, you avoid that story, right? And again, when I always talk about making sure we're using the tools as a doctor, making sure you're encouraging your patients to read their notes in the patient portal, call you on the weekends, call you after hours if need be. Just make sure you got the questions answered as a patient. Again, we talk about, again, recording and writing and all these things that prepare, right? To make sure that, hey, you know what? Like, I can't blame the doctor on all of this. This is on me, right? Because if you do these things, right? And I've talked about this on the show, I think a couple of years ago, right? Like when I was sued by a family, and I can talk about it now because the suit's done and everything. I was sued by a family who wasn't even a family. I was a hospitalist doctor. So I'm not even my patient. They just came into the hospital. And the family, non-compliant, smoker, everything, right? You know, worse, like just cardiovascular disease to the wazoo. Right? And they came in with stroke-related symptoms. And I was saying, and I had to convince the family not to leave the hospital to the point where I had to call one of their family members and say, hey, like mom's trying to leave the hospital. I don't think this should be the case. Do you know that they still sued me after the fact, right? It was like 4 years later, 3 or 4 years later, but they still sued me, right? I wasn't their primary care doctor, right? I wasn't their emergency room doctor. I was a doctor who convinced them to stay, took care of them during the whole time frame. 4 years later, I got sued, right? So these are things. So imagine, right? I'm just going about my day 3.5, 4 years later, getting a lawsuit because now I'm a villain in the person's story, right? Like I'm a villain in the person's story and I had no clue, right? So, and when I say what I say, when I give the story, we could really see who was to blame, right? It's very obvious who was the real issue, right? But yeah, neither here or there. Again, everything is settled. Love that for me. Like this is what happens, right? There's always someone who has to be attached to a story when a lot of times it's not that person's fault, right? It's not that person's fault, right? So again, understand that, yeah, there is complex reasons why things work the way they work, especially in healthcare. But to minimize it to the point where like, all right, it was just because the doctor didn't listen to me, and not like, just ask yourself, man, were there some other issues that could have played a factor in it? Could have, I don't know, maybe could have been me, right? Couldn't have been me. Like I said, I talk about it when we talked earlier about Nana Lewis, right? Like again, I know for a fact there wasn't a healthcare provider who told her not to take those medications because no one talked about it. Was never brought up. It never hit. Because I was waiting. I was reading. I was like, wow. It's like, she's young. Why is she dying of breast cancer? It's like, oh, she wasn't taking the medications. Oh, why was she taking medication? I'm just asking these questions. And because I saw there was no outrage about like, oh my God, I can't believe Dr. So-and-so told her don't do this and Dr. So told her don't do that. Because I didn't see that, it already let me know that wherever her sources were, as far as treatment or as far as information for treatment, definitely didn't have to do with a healthcare provider, because they would have been put on Front Street and they weren't, right? So again, extremely important, especially, as we wrap up here, right? Is your doctor really to blame? Sometimes, right? I'm not gonna sit here and tell you 100% of the time the doctor shouldn't be a part of your origin story. So yes, sometimes, yes, your doctor can be to blame on why things didn't go right, or why, despite the fact that they didn't listen to you, things still ended up going right for you and you were able to persevere. It's a possibility. But a lot of times, right, when we talk the system, gaps of communication, poor doctor-patient relationship, and the thing that people don't like to say, the patient. Sometimes it's the patient's fault as well. Could you imagine if there were like doctors who had TED Talks and all this stuff about how patients never listen to them? And could you imagine like that? I don't think that would go well. Right? I think people would be like, "Oh, you shouldn't be victim blaming. You shouldn't be blaming the patients." There's so many we would automatically be able to say, "All right, there's so many other different factors of why that patient can't do this, why that patient can't do that." I just want the same type of stories to follow when you automatically see someone on the timeline blaming a doctor for not doing something. When you automatically see because I'm on TikTok a lot, right? So I see a lot of the supplemental natural people, right, who always say, your doctor won't tell you this. Your doctor will prescribe this medication because they won't tell you about this medication because they'll get poor or something, right? Because people still think that when I prescribe a medication, I get rich, right? That still is a pervasive thing among some people, some patients, right? So I see that their marketing is even in the aspect of, oh, your doctor won't tell you this. Your doctor didn't do this for you. This is what your doctor is keeping from you, right? All of these secrets that we are supposedly keeping from our patients. But a lot of times, again, it's the patient, right? A lot of times it's the system. A lot of times it's the relationship that was faulty from the beginning. And that's why you're at where you're at, right? So again, if I can get anything, right? If I can get any parting shot off before I leave, just remember, right, that this healthcare thing is a complex relationship. It's a complex relationship, y'all, right? And it's not going to be perfect. It never is. But give the grace that we would give the patient to the doctor as well.